la Présidente. Il me fait plaisir de participer au débat sur le projet de loi 31. So my position is the use of the Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, is ill-advised in this case. It's not that it's illegal to use it, it's just that you should not use it. It's not because you can that you should. And I think I'm going to go on and try to explain in 3 points why actually you should not do it, because it threatens the equilibrium between the different branches of government and eventually would weaken our culture of rights. I think it is very serious what's going on. I appreciate the dilemma over the timing, but this dilemma over the timing was created by the introduction of Bill 5 in the middle of an election, a municipal election. So I'll come back to that. So my 3 points will be this. I'll proceed in 3 points. Number one, what has the Charter given us? Why are people concerned? Why is it that we care and that people are banging on the doors and that people want to be heard on this issue? Number two, why is it that in a mature democracy like Canada, pretty much all governments decide not to use the notwithstanding clause? And indeed, the first times that it has been used mostly at the beginning of the Charter before we achieved a certain level of maturity. And I'll be speaking a little bit about that, with the Saskatchewan example being one that needs to be taken care of. And finally, my third point is about the risks and the cost in proceeding as the government wants to do. So first of all, what did the Charter give us? And I think what I want to say is that it gave a lot of rights to our constituents that are all across different political stripes. So I spend my time a little bit rereading the good old case that I used to teach. And, in 1986, in the Jones case, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized the right to homeschool children as being based in the protection of the freedom of religion. In 1985, and anybody that would have come to Canada as a refugee since 1985 benefited from the Singh case that clarified that there should be some process and some due process in the way in which the assessment of refugee claimants should be done. So everyone, all of our constituents who actually have been impacted by this should know that it came from this. The governments were not in favor of this. They could have decided to use the notwithstanding clause for this, and we would not have these rights right now. After that came other decisions. Hearing impaired persons' access to medical services. Governments didn't want that. They could have used the notwithstanding clause because it was costing money. They decided to obey it. They decided to actually uphold the right of any parent who has a disabled child would not have access to regular school programs but for the Charter. Okay. Challenges to fitness requirements that prevented women and people of Asian descent from accessing jobs as police officers. That also comes from the Charter. Protection for pro-life groups to protest. That comes from the Charter. Protection for Jehovah's Witnesses. That comes from the Charter. Protections for older workers from mandatory retirement. That comes from the Charter. So all of this, and certainly for same-sex couples as well. Actually, my point is we all have constituents that have benefited from these Charter rights. Many of us probably have benefited from these Charter rights. So why are we concerned here about the precedent that's being set? In all these cases, the government had a rationale to deny the people the consideration, and they decide not to, because eventually what came up in Canada is that it was better for government to work within the system of the Charter, when they would wait all the way to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court would recommend changes, and then the government sometimes would adopt the changes or not, or indeed the court would adapt their ruling. So we have evolved as a mature democracy to a way in which we respect the Charter as being good policy. It enhances our good policy making. It also is very good for people because people can go and challenge government in front of the court. When you use Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, you deny people the right to challenge a government's policy in front of the court. And that's wrong. What you want, it's good for people to be able to challenge the government and be told why their rights are being violated. And that's what's happening in our charter. No rights is absolute in Canada. No rights is absolute in Canada. The government can always explain why it thought that it was necessary to violate the charter right. And over time, I think it's good for people to have the ability to challenge us and know why it happened to them. The sense of injustice that people felt is vindicated, and then they can be told exactly what has happened. It's also good for the government, because when they win a case, and governments win often, then there's a sense of peace, of social peace. You had your chance to go to court, you had your day in court, the government explained what happened, and then you should move on. So that's the reason why up to now governments have validated this and have continued to pursue in this. So in my view, I think what we're doing here is threatening a little bit this equilibrium that has evolved. In a way, Section 1 and the Charter has given us a right to rationality, a right to know why are rights being violated, and to challenge government on this. And it is good that it comes from an objective, independent observer, that is, somebody who's not a politician, someone who's not been someone who is appointed and not elected, because it gives a different perspective, and that's what people are seeking. I would also say that it has provided a lot of discipline to the government process. We have better policy because all of us know that indeed if there's the possibility of a citizen going to court and challenging a government decision, and we would have to explain why indeed their rights have been violated, whether we had attempted to violate the right as little as possible, which is our duty under Section 1 of the Charter. So essentially, I think my point is this. In Canada, we have evolved toward this little equilibrium between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, and this has worked well for us. It turned out to be a beautiful thing for all of us that indeed we have continued to be in that place. It has allowed from social peace, from resolution of difference, and we should be proud of the way in which we have achieved that. So my only point here is that we're threatening this because this is too low a bar to use the notwithstanding clause. The way it was invented, the way it was created was certainly at the beginning of the Charter to recognize that people were very anxious about the way in which the courts were going to use it, use the Charter. But every time it has been after the Supreme Court of Canada decision, not in the middle of the judicial process, and that's a problem. So I think that's another issue that should be gone. The Attorney General was right when she quoted from the book that I had the honor of editing, where we say more should be talked about the notwithstanding clause, not to say that it should be used more often, but in fact there's a large discussion about whether it is still necessary in light of the fact that most governments have decided not to use it, or whether there should be parameters about when and how. Pardon. Is that, am I, okay.
Again, encouraging the members, our House Leader and the Premier, the crosstalk isn't helpful. I'll return to the member, please.
Continue? Okay. I was too long? No, they are. Okay. Well, so I just wanted to say, so indeed, I think in this case, what has been raised is whether, and I think the Attorney General raised the question about whether this was solely a political issue, that is the size of the Toronto City Council. In Canadian constitutional law, there's no such thing as a political issue if you can find a right that's been violated. And in this case, I think once you are going to interfere in an election, it raises the process, the question as to whether you want to maintain as a constitutional right the integrity to the democratic process. So that's one of the issues that's in front of us today. I also want to say, I think I was surprised to find that the Fraser Institute had commented on this issue and commented that indeed there was very little evidence that changing the number of city councillors would actually reduce the cost. There's an entire analysis of this and saying that this is not going to happen. So it's normal for citizens who are asking, why are my rights being violated, to want to know and see that the Fraser Institute say, well, no, the evidence is not there, that there's a good justification. So let me just move quickly to the issue that I want to end briefly at the end, which is the risks and the cost. In my view, and I think most people that are speaking, it's because of the value of the precedent here. Okay? Next time, not this government, maybe a government of a different stripe could decide that, well, we were elected, and we want to ban pro-life protests because we feel we have the duty to do so. Or we want to ban protests on the legislative grounds. And just by inserting the notwithstanding clause in that act, they would immediately prevent anybody from challenging this. So many of our constituents, people that have voted for the Conservative Party, would not want to have pro-life supporters, for example, being prevented from ever expressing their viewpoint. Other risks. Well, I think it is quite clear that Bill 31 will be challenged in court because even this use of the notwithstanding clause in the context in which it was used raises some issues. Already people are talking about whether there's an element of retroactivity that is incorrect, maybe not, or whether it violates international law, which would be another reason why the notwithstanding clause could be challenged. I've said before, and I am also very concerned about that even if we use the notwithstanding clause here, it may not solve all the problems. The appeal may be lost by the government. We don't know. You obviously thought you were going to not lose that first instance, but the appeal could be lost. And one of the arguments that is in front of the court is an argument that the integrity of the democratic process was violated. Therefore, it's not a violation of the Charter, it's a violation of the unwritten principles of the Constitution, that is the democratic principle. And that violation cannot be cured by the notwithstanding clause. So my fear is that even after all this work, and we could end up with a declaration by the Supreme Court that the Bill 5 and now Bill 31 is unconstitutional, and we have an unconstitutional Toronto City Council sitting. And that will be a problem, I think, for everyone. So I urge you, I think there is certainly, the other part is I think people have talked a lot about the cost. It's not only the cost of litigation that will be ongoing, but also the cost to the legitimacy of this election. The cost to people that are being elected in an election that will continue to be fraught with difficulty. When people there will be a deficit of legitimacy when you are the notwithstanding council who was elected when there was a recognition that there was a violation of freedom of expression. So it's dangerous, and that's my point. It is dangerous to go into this route when there is an alternative. So, en conclusion, je vous implore, I have to say in conclusion, I urge you to rethink this. Our reputation as legislature is on the line here. You will be the first one to vote for the notwithstanding clause. This is serious. This will have an impact not only now, but will have an impact on the culture of rights for years to come. And when there will be new government that use the notwithstanding clause in ways that actually does not protect your constituents, I think you may have some compte à rendre. You may have to actually give accounts. So I urge you to think about the charter rights that many of your constituents benefit. When a constituent of yours or with yourself is charged inappropriately, they need the charter. When their privacy is violated, they need the Charter. When they experience discrimination, they need the Charter. When their free speech on campus and elsewhere is violated, they need the Charter. When they have some exposure to, when they're part of a religious minority, they definitely need the Charter. So, je vous demande de réfléchir sérieusement à ce que vous êtes en train de faire, parce que tout ce qui se passe ici va avoir un impact sur l'avenir de la capacité des gouvernements d'utiliser cette clause de façon plus facile. That's what people are afraid here, is that because you're doing it today, you open the door to another government doing it again and again. And if it becomes a routine procedure, we do not have rights in Canada anymore. The rights will be presumed to always be under the notwithstanding clause, and no challenges will be allowed. And that's a difficulty, and that's a problem. So I have to say, I spent a little bit of time looking over what were the big ambitions of the Charter, how it has changed, how the way in which it's interesting to see people laughing on the other side about, I feel very passionate about this. I spent a lot of my years as the General Counsel to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. So I've defended many people who probably would never vote for me. That's right. Who never would vote for me. People that actually had opinions that I did not respect.
Come to order.
But at the end of the day, at least I was able to defend their right to free speech. And I think this is what I'm talking about. I think that the danger in which we're threading here is to create a precedent that will haunt us in the future. So this is all our responsibility to evaluate not only the precedent, the value of the precedent, but also the risk of unconstitutionality, the risk of uncertainty that continues to exist, that will exist because this bill will be challenged in court. And the cost. We haven't talked about the cost of litigation, the cost of all of us staying here, being called a second time, the cost on the City of Council in Toronto to have to still wait to decide which kind of ballots. There is an obvious solution. Let it go. Let it go. It's time to just accept. 47 seats is okay. You can start a big consultation after October and make sure that it's done right, that the people of Toronto are not threatened, that the legitimacy of the election is not at stake, and that I think that will continue to be a more efficient governance. Thank you very much.